This is a short little mini lesson on some algebra basic skills. Particularly, we're going to be looking at squares and cubes, and then square roots and cube roots. So you might be very familiar with what a square and a square root is. Maybe not as familiar with a cube and a cube root. That's why we're going to review this. And I'm going to show you how to do this in the graphing calculator. So go ahead and make sure you have your graphing calculator next to you. So first, let's talk about exponents. Exponents are used to represent repeated multiplication. So I have a nice little example here up at the top. And you can see that 2 to the 5th power, remember the 2 is called my base and the 5, the little number, is called my exponent. So if I have something like 2 raised to the 5th, basically it's going to say that it's 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 is going to be represented 5 times. So you don't actually have to write out all those 2's, but you'll really just need to write out the answer. So I'm just going to kind of show you how this works. So 3 to the 4th power, really what that's saying, I'm going to write it out. Feel free to do the same in your notes, but it's saying that I have 3 and it's being multiplied by 3 or multiplied by itself 4 times. So now, when I calculate that out, I can either do it by hand, and I can say, well, 3 times 3, that's 9, 9 times 3 is 27, 27 times 3 is 81. I can do that, or I can do it right in my calculator. So 3 to the 4th, the answer is going to be 81. Now let me show you how to just pop this right into your calculator, because you might not know this right off the bat, and as the exponents get bigger, like 3 to the 18th power, you might not want to sit there and try to calculate 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So in your calculator, go ahead and press the number 3, that's your base number. Now, if your exponent is anything greater than 2, you have to use this little button. And the button is called the caret button. You can see it right up here, up at the top of your screen. This button is located right above the division symbol. You'll see it, and it's also under the clear button. So go ahead and click that. And so 3 raised to the 4th power. Go ahead and click 4. So what you should see is 3 caret 4. And that will give you, if you say equals, that's going to equal your answer of 81. So you can simply just do that right on your calculator. All right, how about 5 to the 3rd power? So that's really, if I expanded this out, it's really saying 5 times 5 times 5, which you might know right off the back of your hand, which is 125. But let's say you don't. You could say 5 times 5 is 25, and then multiply 25 times 5. Or you can put it into your calculator. 5 caret 3 will give you that 125. All right, 6 squared is a pretty common one. That's just going to be broken down into 6 times 6, which we know is 36. Same thing, you would do 6 caret 2. Now, remember when I said anything above 2, you need to use the caret? Well, if you just have the power of 2, we call that squaring something. And the calculator actually has a button for it. So this one in your calculator is going to be the other button that you see up at the top. It's going to be the x squared. So in your calculator, here's what you would do. You would type in 6. And then the button that is the x squared button, it's it's basically diagonal from the 7. And it's above the button that says log x squared. If you click that, you'll see that you get a little exponent of 2, which will give you that same answer when you press enter of 36. So you could also do the 6 caret 2 if you like. Both of the functions work in your graphing calculator. Okay, now let's talk about exponents that have bases with negatives. This is where things get a little tricky, and I want to make sure I clear this up before we move forward in any of the future lessons here. So an important note, you have to use parentheses with negative numbers because it really makes a difference. Let me show you how. In this first example, you can see that I have negative 3 in parentheses raised to the 2nd power, or squared. Now, what that's actually saying in expanded form is negative 3 times negative 3. I can write it like that. I could also write it in parentheses like this. Either way is exactly the same. But you can see that negative 3 times negative 3 is going to give me a positive 9. That is important. Now, I'm going to come right back to this example here, and I'm going to show you how to do this in the calculator, but I just want to look at the next example before we do that. Notice how the only thing different in the second example is the fact that there's no parentheses. Now, in the first example, my base number was -3. In my second example here, my base number is just 3. So really, when I expand this out, this is what it looks like. -3 times 3. Because technically, 3 is the number that I see twice, and the negative is just tacked on outside, giving me a different answer of -9. Now, I know that might be confusing, but you have to type this into your calculator exactly like this in order to get the proper answer. Now, you might be wondering, well, how does this work like this? Well, it's simple. It's the order of operations, which we've studied before. So let me explain what it means with the order of operations. In my first example here, you can see that I have a quantity of -3. And the only operation that I'm asked to do using PEMDAS is my exponents. So I'm taking that whole quantity and I'm raising it to the second power. But in the second example, I'm taking the 3, I'm raising it to the second power, and then I'm multiplying it by the invisible -1 out front. So it's really the order of operations that the calculator is doing. So you have to be very aware of this. Now, let's make matters even more challenging here. What if I have a negative outside and then a negative inside? We're going to do the order of operations again. So this is really saying this. I have -3 times -3, right? Because I see -3 twice. But then that negative out front, I'm going to multiply him from outside. Anytime you see a negative by itself like this, really it's just -1. So if you want to put a 1 there that's like an invisible 1, feel free to do that if it helps you. So really what this is saying is if I put these two together, that's going to give me 9. But then I have that negative out front. So essentially the final answer is going to be -9. You have to be very careful with these negative ones, which is why a calculator on hand is a really great tool. Okay, now we're going to kind of flip it around. Instead of doing squares and cubes and raising numbers to higher powers, we're going to go ahead and take the square root and the cube root. And I'm going to show you how to do this on the calculator. Now, I know we all know that the square root of 81 is 9, right? All right, well, we know that because 9 times 9 is 81. Let me show you how to do this in the calculator. So what you're going to do is you're going to use those buttons that I have circled right here, second and the x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and press second and then the x squared button. And you'll see that a little square root symbol is going to pop up. Well, you guessed it, you're just going to go ahead and place 81 right underneath and press enter. And you'll see that, of course, that equals 9 like we said. Now, we have another example here. We have plus or minus 225. Now, the plus or minus is very important because later on when we study quadratics, we're going to talk about the positive and the negative root of a number like this. Right now, we're just going to talk about the positive root, which is what we call the principal root. So you don't really need to always worry about the negative one. What I mean by that is the square root of 225 is 15, right? But technically, isn't 15 times 15 225 and also -15 times -15 225? So both of them work. The principal root is what we usually find, which is the positive one. But in this case, since they gave me that they wanted the positive and the negative root, I have to write positive and negative in front of that 15. All right, the square root of 9 over 16. Don't be confused just because it has a fraction. I know that you know that the square root of 9 is 3. So I'm going to go ahead and write a 3. And I know that you know that the square root of 16 is 4. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a 4 there. And I'm done. It's as simple as that. In the calculator, I would just say second, and then I choose my x squared, and I just simply put 9 divided by 16. And again, when you do that, it's always going to give you that decimal. But in the last section, we talked about, so it'll give you the decimal of 0.75. Just press math, enter, enter. and that will give you your fraction of 3/4. All right, negative 36, so the square root of negative 36. So let's go ahead and let's try to put this in our calculator. Why not? So let's go ahead and press second, x squared, and then remember, this is a negative. It's not a minus sign, so be careful to use the negative symbol, which is underneath the 3. So negative 36. And you'll notice that your calculator, once you press enter, is going to say error, non-real number, doesn't work. Because you can't take the square root of a negative number. There is no solution for this problem. Okay, and then the last one here, I just wanted to show you a little variety of examples. So the key to know here is that when you have a number outside of a square root, this right here is multiplication. So really I'm just taking negative 2 times the square root of 100. Well, I know that the square root of 100 is 10, so I'm just going to rewrite it like this. Negative 2 times 10 is, of course, negative 20. So you can do this in your calculator just by pressing negative 2, and then second, x squared with your 100 there, and it'll give you negative 20. Just be very careful to put in your negative symbol and not your minus symbol. Okay, and the last part of this section here is cube roots. So let's go ahead and talk about the cube root. I do have some different buttons you're going to push on your calculator. This one's actually kind of hidden, so you really got to pay attention to this one. I want the cube root of 343. Now you might know that. You might know what number, it's something times something times something is going to give you 343. But let's say you don't. So let's go ahead and press math. Choose option 4 by selecting the number 4. And then go ahead and place 343 underneath the division symbol. I'm sorry, the radical symbol. That should give you 7. So that is going to be my answer to this problem. It's just 7. The cube root of 343 is 7. How about this one? Notice how my negative is outside. So I'm going to press my negative button. Then I'm going to do my sequence of cube root symbols. So I'm going to do math, choose option 4, and then I'm going to put 64 to give me an answer of negative 4. Now, I could have covered up that negative and just did the cube root of 64 and then multiplied it by that negative 1 to get the same answer. All right, same idea here. I want the cube root of 125. I personally think that the trickiest part of this is distinguishing between the cubed and the square root. Because if you don't do that, it could really cause some confusion. So I'm going to say the cube root of 125 is going to be 5. And then the cube root of 512 is going to be 8. And I'm done. All right, this is where things get a little tricky because it's unlike the square root. Now, back when we talked about the square root, we talked that you can't have a negative underneath that symbol. Well, it doesn't work the same way for cube roots. So for this one, let's just go ahead and just focus on the cube root of negative 8. Let's just go ahead and do that. So math, choose option 4, and just place a negative 8 underneath that cube root symbol. That's going to give me negative 2. So really I have negative times negative 2, or negative 1 times negative 2, which of course I can connect these and make it a plus, which gives me an answer of 2. So the point of this problem was to just show you that you can have a negative underneath a cube root, because what that means is this. This section right here is going to be negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Because negative 2 times negative 2 is 4, and then 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, giving me that number that's underneath. So cube roots, since they're multiplied by 3 times, you can have a negative underneath. Okay, and then the last one here. Let's go ahead and just put this one right in the calculator. 4, math, choose option number 4, negative 27. That's going to give us negative 12. Now, if I were to break that guy down here, I would have to do this. I would have to find the cube root of negative 27, which is going to be negative 3. And then I'm going to multiply it by that positive 4 outside to give me that negative 12. So hopefully this was a good review of exponents and square and cube roots for you. And it probably was helpful to you to show you how to use these functions in the graphing calculator.